everyone in here knows a lot more history about Pompano than I do. I can tell you about my family, though, is that my grandmother was a lion, and my grandfather was a fisher. And quick stories is, of course, the Lion family, church lions, had two sons. One was Henry Lawrence, also known as Bud, and the other was Clinton Lyons. And so Clinton Lyons had 5 children. My grandmother, Inez, and then Miss Cammie, and then Merle, and then Cammie, and then Uncle Clinton Jr., and then, of course, Aunt Barbara Platts, who's still with us today. So that was that side. But Bud Lyons, Uncle Bud, he didn't have any children. Him and Miss Lena. So he married Lena Fisher, which was my grandfather's sister. So they never had any children. So obviously Uncle Bud was into big farming. And all of us were, all these families were in farming. And so he assembled what is known as the entire city of Coral Springs, he assembled as his farm. And so that's all they knew was farming. But so when they didn't have any children, my father, Benny Fisher, became kind of boy. And so on the labels of the green beans and peppers was a picture of my dad as a little boy, and the labels was Benny Boy Beans, Benny Boy Peppers, whatever it was, which was shipped all over the nation, right, Tommy? Right. They were shipped right here from Pompano Beach. The packing house is right in Dixie in Old Pompano, and that's what they were. So when he died in 1953, my Aunt Lena became, of course, land rich and cash poor, couldn't continue the farming. So my grandfather sold the first 5,000 acres of the Coral Springs to Mr. Hutt, who had developed Galto Shamal. And then the remaining 15,000 acres was eventually sold with Mr. Hunt. He brought in Coral Ridge Properties and Westinghouse. And what they did, they developed the entire city of Coral Springs. So Lyons Road was named after Uncle Bud. So I always ask you, some of those were at the ribbon cutting at the pier. And I always, Granddad, why didn't you buy property on the beach? Like Mr. Kester did. And he looked at me and said, son, you can't grow beans on sand. And I said, I guess you're right, Granddad. I guess you're right. So my roots, obviously, so my great-grandfather, Clinton Lyons, signed the Articles of Incorporation in 1908 for the city of Pompano Beach. And then my grandfather, Fisher, served in 1943 as the mayor of Pompano Beach. So I always tell people, if somebody would have told me when I was growing up that I'd be mayor of Pompano and then, of course, Mayor Broward, I would say, you're crazy. I'll never make it. I never was interested in politics. But anyway, I'm thankful for what Pompano's done for me. And this is my home. I've raised my family here. I'm 4th generation. And Miss Irene had the Army surplus downtown and all those wonderful stores. And Miss B.B. Delk's mama and Nawana's mama was Georgia Cheshire, and she was my grandmother's best friend. They were like cohorts together. And then, of course, Tom Johnson's family was very close to my grandparents. So I've rambled enough, but so great to see everybody and all the old-timers here. Keep up the good work, what everybody's doing, and keep our memories alive, because that's what we need to do, Jerry, and this is what it's all about. So God bless everybody. Thank you.
My name is Tom Keaton, and I'm an original bean picker, graduated in 1957. And I had a little bit different story. I came to Florida from Chicago, so I wasn't born in Pompano. We came down in a trailer from Chicago, and we lived right over on First Street, behind the Baptist Church. Mrs. Weathersby had a big brick home, 3 trailers on each side. So we lived in one of those trailers. And then we decided we'd upgrade. So we moved down the street to the 7th block and lived in a Kester house. We lived in a Kester house about 15 years. We did do 2 different locations. They used to have some out on the beach where this is not going to be a boring story. But we used to have fun. There was a meat market out on Hammondville Road. What I can't remember their names, but he and one of the cops, we used to go out the beach and steal sea turtles and bring them back. It's illegal now. That was a long time ago. Take it down to his butcher shop, and we'd have turtle steaks and grits and gravy, and that's how I grew up. I think the proudest I am is that now that I'm at John Knox, I haven't seen her in so long, but I didn't know her with gray hair. So, I'll be 85 next month, but I'll tell you what, I'm so proud to have come from Pompano and to grow up with the farmers. We didn't have money and the farmers did, but you know what? It didn't make a difference at that time. And it was a heck of a way to grow up. And somebody said, who was the principal at the the small school in Pompano then? And I said, what? There was one building. We had all 12 grades in one building and one principal. But the memories, we have to keep going. I committed for the long as I live to be part of this. And I'm so proud to be part of it and part of all of you.
My name is B.B. Cheshire. Okay, my father came to Pompano with his father in 1921-22 and farmed. They skipped a year and came back in 1924 and settled in Pompano. There were 3 Cheshire brothers, Will, Matt, and Charlie Cheshire, and they were all farmers. My dad and grandfather sharecropped with Mac Cheshire for the first 2 years, and after that they went into farming for themselves. My daddy started farming on 441 in Hillsborough Canal in 1928 for himself. I was born at 413 Northeast 10th Avenue. There were only 2 through streets to town, and that was 6th Street and 1st Street. And no kindergarten. We didn't have kindergarten back then. And I went to all 12 grades right here at Pompano in the same block. And Pompano was a good place to grow up in. Most of the people were related. You didn't get by with a whole lot because somebody would tattle on you. But it was a good life. It was a close-knit community. Everybody watched out for each other, helped each other. It's been wonderful for me. I still live 3 blocks from where I was born. I was born at home and delivered by my uncle, Dr. McClellan, and my brother was delivered at home also. My sister, Nawana, got lucky. She was the first baby born in Broward General Hospital. Her claim to fame. But no, it was wonderful. I'll answer whatever I can answer.
Your house you were born in still stands over Northeast 2nd Street.
The house I was born in 1941 when the war broke out. It was either the summer of 42 or 43. Dad had the house movers come pick up the house on 10th Avenue, bring it to Northeast 2nd Street, 433 Northeast 2nd Street, and put it there. We were 2 houses down from my grandfather. And that house is still there. Nancy and Ken Belzer live in it. It's a house with the blue shutters. And it withstood a lot of hurricanes and survived. It had a lot of Dade County pine in it. And my dad was very active with the market. He was one of the 5 men that went to Tallahassee and got the market built where it is now. That market was built for $150,000 in 1939, and he was instrumental in getting it built. Your turn.
My parents were Mo and Goldie Hirschman. We came to Pompano in 1934 from probably the first New Yorkers that came to Pompano. And I grew up here, but in the meantime, my father bought a drugstore on First Street. It was Borders Pharmacy, and then it became Moe's Pompano Pharmacy. And he filled prescriptions even though he wasn't a pharmacist. There were no rules or laws then. You just kind of did whatever. Anyway, I grew up here, and it was a great place to grow up. I walked to school, and after school I went to the Baptist church to storytelling hour because both of my parents worked. I graduated as a bean picker in 1948. Anyway, I'm still in Pompano, and I'm at John Knox, and it's great. And if anybody wants to know anything about Pompano, I'll try to remember. But there's one thing I do remember. During the war, there were, in 1942, there were these stands on the beach. And my father went to one of these stands, and I went with him. And we watched for different kinds of airplanes and different kinds of ships that should not have been there during the war. And we had a walkie-talkie and reported it to, I don't know to whom, but I was with my father. I was 12 then. Anyway, anybody want to know anything about Pompano? Here I am.
My name is Cindy Peters, and my sister Glenda, and my grandfather, and came to Pompano in the late 1800s with his brother Harry McNabb, and they were in the central part of the state when the big citrus freeze was in 1895, and it wiped them out. And so they came south to work on the railroad and loved it, and went back, and then several years later they brought their mother and their two brothers and came down. And when they first got here, they made a lean-to out on the beach, and where the Holiday Inn was south of Atlantic, and they camped until they built a shack, however they were building things back then. And they farmed on Lettuce Lake, but I remember when Glenda and I were very young, the farm had, our grandpa's farm was where Bay Colony is now. And I know. And he sold it in 1956 because he passed away in 58. And I see Betty sitting over there, and she's got wonderful stories too, because her father-in-law, our uncle, was the one that got swallowed by the alligator. And as well, if she's not going to tell you, I will. And I'm sure this is all old Pompano lore, so everybody's heard it before. But they were working on, the two brothers were working building the Pompano Beach Hotel, and it was summertime, and all the kids were out there helping. And at lunchtime, the boys went down to the Intercoastal to swim. And an alligator got Jimmy. And one of the kids ran back to get their dads. And he got loose. from it, and then it hit him with his tail and knocked him back into the water, and it swallowed him again. And I guess once our grandfather and his brother got down there, they got Jimmy away from the alligator, and they had to take him to Miami, which was called Lemon City, where they ended up taking him to Dr. Depew down there. And it's kind of been one of those things. Every time Glenda and I and our brother were growing up, every time we saw him, we'd say, "Can we see your scars?" And he still had them till the day he died.
Hi, my name is Donna Pridemore Williams, and my grandfather, T.S. Jack Pridemore, served a lot of your farmers on Hammondville Road at Jack's Bar. He was in the liquor business, and so was my dad, Merrill Pridemore. I just want to read a story that my dad wrote about probably 40 years ago, and it's called Times Gone By. It says, "Tell me about Pompano. A new friend once said to me, and I could do no better than this. I love Pompano because it helps me remember. It helps me know who I am, all my people, my great-grandfather, my two grandfathers, my two grandmothers, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, my nephews, my mother lie in the earth of the old Pompano Cemetery. I am aware that I am among them and that they will always be with me. During my visits to pay reverence, I know that a man can love his past and be in misery with it. Before the great television culture, before the federal expressways and suburban sprawls which so disfigured and reshaped the land we had once known, the Pompano of my youth was more closely akin physically and in spirit to the 1920s and 1930s than to the 1970s and 1980s. It was a small farming community where everyone either farmed or depended on the farmers, directly or indirectly, for their livelihood. Raising their crops, the farmers fought insects, floods, frost, freeze, wind burn, and hurricanes. They plowed through the mud and around rocks, stumps, and trees. They farmed to live, and they lived and loved to farm. I believe Pompano's single most enduring quality has been the burden of its memory, its past of rare courage and honor and sacrifice. From its common sense of soil sprang the disposition in the soul of it for the most intense strivings and triumphs, for imagination and exuberance and playfulness. It endured because of its human beings, its black people, its white people, its politicians, its characters. For history is not events, it is people acting and living their past in the present. This alone was enough to implant in its sons and daughters, no matter where they would live, a remembrance of Pompano and of the days gone by. Thank you.
My name is William Mobley McClellan. Jerry Bowman, who's related through my cousins, there's a lot of cousins here of mine, asked me to come to speak, say what I could remember about Pompano Beach. I actually grew up in Lighthouse Point, but most of my youth was spent at my family's store here in Old Pompano, which was McClellan's Firestone. Both sides of my name, Mobley, let's start with the Mobley side. My grandmother and grandfather was Lon and Marie Mobley. They had E.A. Mobley's 5 and 10 cent store on the other side of Hammondville Road. My grandmother, I grew up with my grandmother in our home because her husband died just when my parents were married. So I grew up with my grandmother, and I would remember hearing all the stories. They came down, my grandmother's side came to Deerfield Beach first because her brother was in World War I and had mustard gas, and so they actually had a gas station and a store that was in Hillsborough Beach on the ocean side, and at one time they actually owned one block of where the pier was, but one of the hurricanes took that away. So they ended up settling here. My grandfather was a farmer, and my grandmother ran the stores. And if I'm correct, and some of my cousins can tell me, I think my grandmother also had dress stores and stuff like that. So, but I remember, I'll be 60 this December. I remember going to the stores and sitting on the counters as little, it's some in my back of my mind. I can remember sitting there and they had big counters with the glass tops and stuff. And Sue Gardner worked in the store and some other people. But people, when they find my name out, they'll say somewhere that they worked there during the summers or something with the stores. The one thing that I do remember, we used to spend a lot of time in the Bahamas. And my grandmother, when they found out my grandmother was at the Jack Tar Resort, a lot of the black pastors would come over and bring my grandmother and take her to church, and the people would know there because my grandmother was one of the first people, I guess, that gave a lot of the migrant workers credit. So they always wanted to have her to their church and thank her for everything that she did. On my dad's side, the McClellan side, my grandfather was Dr. George McClellan, and he was married to Novice. And they had four children. Of course, Sterling, who was killed in World War II. Novice, Blas, was my aunt. My father, Lucius William McClellan, Bill McClellan, and the youngest one was Bobby McClellan. His wife was Henrietta, that did all the antique shows for many years. My dad and mom, the big joke was always they got married much later in life. They were married in 1960. My father came back from World War II. The big joke was they were the only two people left in Pompano Beach that weren't related that got married. So, but the story was that my grandfather, who was the first doctor in Pompano, died in 1958, I believe. I was born in 63, but before he died, he told my father that if he was ever going to marry somebody, he better marry that Mary Clifford. Mary Clifford Mobley was her married, and they ended up getting married later on. So, let's see what else I can tell you. My father had McClellan's Firestone. I believe my grandfather had started the business with both my Aunt Novice, my father, and my Uncle Bobby. My Uncle Bobby ran the store that was on Federal Highway, that Auto Spot now. But the store, what I remember, as far as I was telling Jerry, what I can remember as a kid, every Saturday that I can remember, I was at the store. I'd get up at the crack of dawn with my dad, go down there, and at that time we had everything from appliances, toys, everything else. And my favorite thing was sit behind the cash register and count the money going back and forth. But it was just neat. We'd go over for lunch. I'd run over to the Dairy Queen. That was a big thing. I'd always con $1 or something out of my dad. So go over there. We still had, we didn't own it, but we had McClellan's Pharmacy was there. But I always remember it was a big deal to go to Heartlines for lunch. Yeah. And trying to think of what else. But growing up, I just remember the stores and everybody's coming in and seeing people. And it was a wonderful community. Even though I didn't live in this town, we always felt part of it. And then afterwards, many years later, there's so many people that after my mom and dad have passed away have reached out to me just to say, well, when I say my name's Mobley McClellan, they either talk about my dad, my mom, my grandmother, and stuff like that. And you all are, whatever you do with this historical society, I'm blessed to know that you're doing the history to keep it because it gets lost. And Jerry and everybody, I'm sorry you all couldn't save the building. That was my grandfather's office, which was the first concrete building, I think, in Pompano. It was a valiant effort, and I want to thank you all. I know from the family, I'm really the only one that's down here, and I almost think I'm the only one left. But I just want to say thank you for everything that you all do. And one of the things I say about getting back to my grandfather, I was down having medical treatments one time with a doctor, and he said, I think you need to turn around and look on the wall. And it was a picture of the original charter for the American Medical Association for Broward County. My grandfather was one of the first 8 doctors to start it, and I saw his signature that I thought was kind of neat. But let's see, trying to think of I heard stories that my grandfather used to have. If some of the Indians that were way out west in the county, they would come in on the canal, and they would take him out. And if it was too late for him to come back at night, he would camp out there and come back. But a lot of times they had to go out on a Model T Ford, and but they would go out and they actually had to have a stick and somebody on the front and poke alligators and stuff out of the way so they could get back to civilization. But other than that, that's about all I know from stories. But growing up here, it was a great thing, and seeing a lot of people on Saturdays working.
Well, my name is Tom Johnston, and I've lived in Pompano all my life. I am warm in my heart right now after listening to all these wonderful stories and all these old names from the past. I knew so many people. I knew Mo Hirschman as a kid, go in Mo's pharmacy there, and we would not have money for comics, but he had racks of comic books, and so we'd stand there and read the comic books, and Mo would let us do that. The other things you used to do is it was air conditioning, and so you got out of this miserable South Florida heat for a little bit as a kid. But I grew up with a lot of people in this room. Sterling Edward Marsh, named after his uncle Sterling, is your first cousin.
Correct.
I attended your grandfather's funeral at the First Baptist Church in 1958. One of the things Miss Beebe was talking about, her wonderful father, who was dear to my heart, was he was a brilliant businessman. He was so brilliant that he was a charter board member of the second charter ever given by the federal government for a savings and loan association. The first charter was awarded to the First Federal Savings and Loan Association of Miami, and the second charter was First Federal Savings Loan Association of Broward County, and Harvey Cheshire was chairman of the board during a number of years and got that started and did a lot by having that lending institution in the community to help our housing boom, which we had during the 60s and 70s. He planted those early seeds. We heard about Novice McClellan, but her maiden name was Collier. And she had come down from, I believe, South Carolina and was living in Live Oak, Florida, and met a nice young fella who had come down from South Carolina, had 1 year of medical school, but was allowed to be a doctor, and his name was George McClellan, and he was a fine young man, but he couldn't make much of a living there in Wildwood. And before they left there, she had her sister, Miss Georgia Collier, come down, and the three of them moved to Pompano. And it wasn't long after that that Harvey met Georgia, and she became Mrs. Cheshire. We heard about Lamar's aunt and uncle. They were very dear to me. Lena Lyons had an office in a side pocket door on the laundromat at First and Flagler. And she was known as the cheapest human being on the face of the earth. But wasn't to me, because during the 1950s I had a paper route, and I used to bring the paper to Miss Lyons, and she would pay the bill monthly. But I always remember she gave me a dime tip, and the dime was big. And to get a dime tip from Lena Lyons, I just was over the moon, okay? But when I go to speak in April, I'll tell you about all the businesses up and down Hammondville Road. And we all know that Hammondville Road is not what it should have been called, because Mr. Hammond had no D in his name. He was a farmer from Palm Beach County, never lived in Broward. He had a small farm out on what they used to call Rock Road, which is what we know as Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard today. And at the time the county commission went to name it Hammondville Road, they wanted to name it after him, so they asked several of the people up and down the road what this man's name was. And so people with an accent would sometimes add letters to the name. So they put a D. So it's always been Hammond with a D, misspelled, Road, all those years. I went to kindergarten, private kindergarten, no public kindergarten. It's a nice lady by the name of Valdez Craig, who had come to Pompano with her brother, George Pennard Banks II. He had a son who was my age by the name of George Pennard Banks III, otherwise known as Penny Banks. And Penny and I grew up in Pompano and were fast friends. I saw him earlier this year. He came down to Rotary. He lives in High Springs, Florida with his wife. And Banks Road is named after George Banks. I also went to kindergarten with Pete Green. Pete Green's dad was Virgil Green, and he was a successful farmer. And we have Green Road, and Pete lives in Tallahassee now. He's a retired Georgia banker, and he made his money the old-fashioned way. He inherited it. But he was a good kid, and I grew up with Pete, went grades 1 through 5. But we all went to kindergarten there. And know this about Mr. Kester. Mr. Kester never built a Kester house. He is credited with building them, but he never built one. And I'll tell you who built them when I talk in April, and I'll tell you how he acquired all of them, because he was a very sharp businessman and a very good personal friend of my father, who was a lot older than I was. And I used to get hauled out of bed when I was 5 years old and got in a pickup truck, and we went down to where the Sands Hotel is today, and my dad had a boat there, and Mr. Kester would meet us. And there were no seawalls on the Intercoastal back then, and we would troll up the Intercoastal to Cap's place. And Cap had, remember, he had a big galvanized pail sitting up on the bar, and he served, there were about 40 or 50 fishing boats, and he would serve all the crews early morning breakfast while they're waiting for the tide. And that pail was crowned with eggs, and it was rusting because those were turtle eggs, and they had salt in them. And but he used to make me the best turtle egg pancakes in the world as a little kid. I didn't know any difference; they were great. But I'll tell you some of those stories. And I used, the end of my paper route used to be a guy's house over on 12th, and house is still over there, 12th and Dixie. And his name was Tillman Sewell Pridemore, and he was from Harriman, Tennessee. And Jack and his wife are two of my best friends in Pompano. I'd get to the end of I'd gone to school all day. I had all my newspapers. I would do downtown Pompano, all the way on out to Malden's Dry Goods, which was on the other side of the CSS railroad tracks, which used to be Seaboard at that time. I had all of Avondale, where John Knox Village is, and I would go all the way up to 16th Street and deliver newspapers to all the merchants in the afternoon. So my last paper before I went home was, and I'd pull up Mr. Pridemore and say, Mr. Johnson. Now, I was 11 years old, 10 years old, 10 years old. But he always called me Mr. Johnson. So I always called him Mr. Pridemore. And he would say, stop and visit with me for a while. And he'd have a couple chairs out there on the side. And I would say, well, I got to get home. I've got homework and this and that. And he would say, no, stop. Have a dope with me. Now, you know what a dope was? A dope was a Coca-Cola. Back in the early days of Coke, the manufacturer used to put just a little bit of drug in there, just a little cocaine, and they would give you a real lift. And that's why a Coca-Cola, they used to be the 5 or 6.5 ounce bottles, the little ones. Used to race them up. They'd say, Birmingham, Alabama in the bottom, or they'd say, remember that green glass? They were stamped in there. And those were not called Coca-Colas in the South. They were called dopes. Sit and drink a dope with Mr. Pridemore, and we'd talk about the problems of the world in the mid-1950s, and then I'll go on home. But I won't make this any longer. I can go on for hours about my recollections and reminiscences and loves for people in Pompano. I got introduced to the Pompano Historical Society. I'd practiced law about 5 years, and I got a call that some ladies, old Pompano family ladies, wanted to come see me. And one of them was a lady by the name of Gladys McNabb Walker. And she was a very powerful woman in civic circles in Pompano, and she and her ladies came and sat in my law library, and they say, ladies, how can I help you? Well, Mr. Johnson, we have a problem. Well, I won't go into the problem because it's a wonderful anecdote about the Historical Society, but that's how I got involved for 3 years as the president of the Historical Society. But I've been past president of Rotary Club and past president of Local Bar Association. I was given a certificate as a pioneer from the Broward County Commission in 1978. So the first meeting I actually attended was 48 years ago of the Historical Society. And I've been absent for many, many years doing other things, raising children and helping people with their legal problems and doing things for developers and helping feed this country by going to many South America and Central America countries I don't travel as much anymore. My wife doesn't want me to do that as much, but I still work every day. And I'm in my 80th year now, and I work today, and I work 5 days a week, and I think that's what keeps me going. I could have retired many years ago, but I do it for the love and not the money. I have a daughter who's my youngest, and she's a lawyer for 22 years, and she's my law partner, and I have a son, Matt, who's born and raised here in Pompano, and he works in our office. My wife, Jeannie, does, and I've got a son, Andrew, and he is a lawyer. He's in the fish business right now. But I've got a wonderful family, and so I enjoy working with them. But I enjoyed living in a house at 720 Northeast 3rd Street, right down the street here, who backs up against Miss Beebe's house, where her mom and dad lived. And she lived in the house just to the west, in the Delk house. And I knew Nawana for years before she knew Jerry. And we were all close in Old Town Pompano. But I want to tell you about the Baileys. I want to tell you about their profound effect on Broward County and its progress one day. And I want to tell you about how Bud Lyons acquired his land and who he acquired it from and what he paid for it per acre. And I want to share some reminiscences of how Earl Johns taught me how to pay bean pickers and graders. Over Christmas vacation, I used to go with Earl Johns out to his farms, and he liked me because I had big hands. And the pickers would bring the hampers up, and they want 50 cents a hamper, but that's for a full hamper. So I got taught to press the beans down because they would stack them, so they would pick half a hamper, but it looked like a full hamper. So I had a Pompano Lumber Company nail apron on, but I had nickels and dimes and quarters, and I would pay the people out in the field, and that was interesting. I think we've all benefited by our wonderful agriculture here in Pompano. And when I graduated from Pompano High, bean pickers were the things of the past. Kids have come down here from up north, and it wasn't fashionable to be a bean picker, so they outvoted the rest of us and changed the name to the Pompano Tornadoes. But I always wanted to be a bean picker.
I'm Rob Brantley. I take care of the Pompano Fire Museum. I don't know if I need this mic or not, but I've only been here since 1969. I moved here from Fort Worth, Texas. I feel like an ant among the pioneers of Pompano. Anyhow, I have the honor of taking care of the Pompano Fire Museum. I became a Pompano firefighter in I started with the city of Pompano in 1975. I was in building maintenance, and I was friends with the fire chief. I don't know if any people know Gene Hedges. He was the fire chief at the time. His oldest son was my best friend, and they always, everybody told me, oh, you got to get on the fire department. It's the greatest job in the world. I wanted to be an electrician. I didn't want to be a firefighter, so I became a journeyman electrician. I got on with the city and building maintenance, and every day I'd hear somebody say, oh, you got to get on the fire department. It's the greatest job in the world. And all you do, you get to sit in a recliner, watch TV, and and I'm like, you work 24 hours and you're off 48 hours, and I'm going, I didn't really like being lazy, so I didn't think that was the greatest job. But anyway, one day in 1977, we would use the snorkel truck in Pompano to change the light bulbs at the ballparks, and it was August, and it was hotter than I've got to stop, but it was very hot. And I looked down in the shade of the snorkel, Bill Giles. Anybody know the Giles family here? Bill Giles, his wife comes walking up with a picnic basket, and in the shade of the snorkel truck in the afternoon while I'm up changing light bulbs in the heat, I was dying. As you can see, still I've got sun damage. I'm probably red in the face right now, but I go, okay, tomorrow I'm going to apply for the fire department. I did, and I got hired in 1978. So when I first moved here in '69, I used to walk to the beach every day, and part of my route was to go to the beach fire station. And at the time, let's see if I can make this work. This truck, thank you, Rob. I'll handle this. The Pompano's first fire truck was at the beach station, and they had glass windows. I'd walk by, I had no idea anything about the truck. I just thought it was a really cool thing. And then, like 1970, I was walking by, the truck was gone. The city had sold it at an auction. So, that's picture right here is an original factory picture from 1926 of Pompano's first fire truck. So this picture right here is one of the first pictures taken inside of the museum, which is next to this building. That's another picture from inside the building. That's a picture from the 40s of the front of the building. I'm going this quick because y'all told me I have 3 minutes. Anyway, what I'm here for is to talk about Wade Raines. I don't know if any of you have heard of Wade Raines, but Mr. Raines was he was a pretty interesting character. He was originally with the Rough Riders before he moved to Pompano. He was a part of the, if you see this badge right here, he was part of the South Carolina Volunteers that went with Teddy Roosevelt as a Rough Rider. And then later on in his life, he moved to Pompano, and he became the first first police chief after Pompano was incorporated. There's an article about him, let me see right here. When he died, it was the largest funeral held in Pompano. Attending was for Wayne Raines. Anyway, he was in a car accident. He apparently was quite a character in Pompano at the time. But my connection with him is being a firefighter, and when his family brought Pat a bunch of memorabilia from Mr. Raines, and they brought his police chief badge as being the first police chief in Pompano, and they also brought his fire department badge. He was a 7th firefighter in Pompano from 1926, but police chief before that. I'm not sure exactly the year. I don't know when Pompano, I know they're incorporated in 2008, so I'm assuming in 2008 he was, 1908, I'm sorry. You know, I've been hitting the head a lot, excuse me. So in 1908, he was probably the first police chief, and then later on, after around 1926, he was the 7th firefighter in Pompano. Oh, that's not him. Anyway, that's what I know about Mr. Raines. I also, this right here, this is Bo Giddings. Anybody hear of him before? Okay. He was the fire chief in 1928 of Pompano. Before that, in 1926, when Pompano acquired his first fire engine and the building built next that was originally here before this building was ever built. He was, before 28, there were many fire chiefs because in 1926, the 26 hurricane screwed everything up. And I have the logbooks from 26, so there were several fire chiefs in 26 because people had their own lives to deal with. And then when things were settling down, a couple of years later, the 28 hurricane hit, which was the Okeechobee hurricane. It came through Pompano and tore everything up just like the 26 hurricane. So after in 28, as far as the research I've done with the Fire Museum, Bo Giddings was the first, like, I don't know what you call him. He was one of the first fire chiefs, the first, like, official fire chief of the Pompano Fire Department. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Bo Giddens, when he ran for commissioner, he said, elect me, I need the job.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah. Who didn't? Lamar.
My name is Rick Collier. My dad was James Pelham Collier, known as Pelham. He was the youngest of 11 children who were born in rural South Carolina, the oldest of who was Aunt Novice, who married Dr. George. And that's the reason we're all in Pompano, is because of Dr. George coming down here. And a lot of the Colliers following him down here. A lot of you might not know that Bibi and Nuwana are my first cousins, because their mother was Aunt Georgie. She and my dad were the youngest of those 11 kids. They had, my dad, there was 7 girls and 4 boys. All the boys ended up down here. One of them, who I was named after, my Uncle Glennie, whose son, and I miss dearly, I'm so sad he's not here, is Wayne Collier. Wayne was my first cousin. And I always said that Wayne was the ambassador of the Collier family, because anytime I told somebody my last name was Collier, they would say, "Are you related to Wayne?" I'd say, "That's my first cousin." Wayne knew everybody, and everybody loved Wayne. But anyway, my dad ended up coming down here around 1926 after his dad died. He was a poor sharecropper, and he and his mom moved down here. Her name was Lily Smith Collier. She's buried out in the cemetery in Pompano, and she has a window, stained glass window, in the chapel of the Methodist Church. But I love to hear my dad tell stories of Pompano when he was here as a teenager. And one of my favorite stories is on a Saturday morning, he and his buddies would congregate down in Old Pompano. "What do you want to do today?" "Let's walk out to the lighthouse." The lighthouse keeper was J.B. Eisler. And my dad said many times he and his buddies, maybe 5 or 6 of them, would walk out to the lighthouse. This might be hard to believe, but he said not have a single car pass them, all the way out there and all the way back. And when they got to the lighthouse, Mr. Eisler would always make them take the same solemn oath. "When you get up there, don't touch the lens." Because if any of you have seen that lens, and me and my wife and our 3 daughters at the time, in 1997 got to go up there, and that lens is an unbelievable piece of art. It's 9 feet probably in diameter, glasses, symmetrical. And anyway, my dad loved to tell that story about going up in the lighthouse. Yep, that's right. Another thing is, you guys bringing up Bo Giddings. My dad said Bo Giddings took the fire truck out there off the end of Atlantic Boulevard, somehow got the water pressure, and they went out there and they built a diving platform about 100 yards offshore, due east of Atlantic Boulevard. And he and his buddies would go out there and they would dive off the diving platform. And my dad said one time him and another guy went out there and they were just getting ready to dive, and they looked down there and there was about a 6-foot barracuda under there. And he said they weren't going in the water with that barracuda, so they waited till he left. Another story I love to hear my dad tell was there was a hurricane going through the Keys, and about 15 or 16 of them went out there and they were body surfing. And during that storm, they got pulled out in a riptide. He called it an undertow, to the first reef. And he said they thought they were all going to drown. And my dad's best friend was Emmett Richardson. And Emmett was a strong swimmer. And my dad said, "Emmett, don't leave me, I'll drown." But somehow they all made it back to shore. He said as soon as they hit the shore, any of you guys remember the Pompano Casino? Yes. My dad always talked about the Pompano Casino. That's where they would dress, take off their clothes, put on their swimming trunks. He said they all hit the Pompano Casino, put their clothes on, and left. And he always had a healthy fear of the ocean after that. My dad dropped out of school in the 10th grade because he wanted to learn how to be a farmer. And he went to work for my Aunt Lorene's husband, P.L. Henson. Uncle Red, we called him. Very successful, like Uncle Harvey. And they were instrumental in getting the farmers market built out there. But my dad's, one of his first jobs for Uncle P.L., Uncle Red, was not farming. His job was, he was the dynamite man. And when Uncle Red would buy land, my dad's job was to go out and blow trees up, blow rocks up where they could cut ditches. And he would say he would spend all day with a sack of dynamite sticks going around blowing stuff up. And I couldn't think, man, how could it be any more fun than that? And that's where he did that, is where there's a lot of big fancy homes now. And that's how much it's changed. But I love what Merle Pridemore wrote. And I love Merle. Used to play tennis with Merle years ago. This was a tough place to come back in the turn of the century. It was mosquito infested, snake infested, hot and humid, no air conditioning. Hurricanes would come when you didn't know they were coming. So the people that built this place, the early farmers, and this was an agricultural community, they were a tough breed. They were tough nuts. And my cousin Wayne he's 20 years older than me. He was born in 1932. And I used to love to hear Wayne talk about growing up in Pompano. And Wayne would tell me, man, Ricky, he said, I'd walk out the front door and he said, I thought I was Tarzan because there was nothing but trees all around. I'd walk up my front door and I'd be lost in the woods. And I kind of envied that he got to grow up during that time period. I will tell you a story about Dr. George and Aunt Novice. Aunt Novice was his nurse. I don't think she was a registered nurse, but she was a nurse. And I came along when they started having pediatricians, Dr. Hyatt, Dr. Bussey. But my two older brothers had to go to Dr. George when they got sick. And they both talk about, Jimmy and Harold, we hated to go see Dr. George because when we had to get a shot, we'd drop our pants, and Aunt Novice would throw that shot into us like a dart. And they said, we hated that. We hated Aunt Novice giving us shots because she was a tough nut. But if any of you guys knew Aunt Georgie and Aunt Lorene and my dad and Uncle Glenny died when I was 8 years old, but they were characters. I mean, they were really, they were cool people. They were just cut out of a different mold. But before I go, I have to share this one story about my cousin Bibi. I don't know if she remembers this or not, but although we're first cousins, her second child, Barry, he and I are the same age. And so when we were in elementary school, we got into this thing, me and Barry and Johnny Johnson, where we would camp out in each other's backyards in a pup tent. Well, for some reason, this one particular night, it was just me and Barry camping out in the back of Jimmy and Bibi's house. And Bibi told us, don't leave this yard when it gets dark. And we, okay, Barry, okay, Mama. Well, we only lived, my house was about 3 blocks away. And Barry knew that we had a big candy jar in my living room. So Barry said, let's go get some candy from your mom and daddy's house. So I said, okay. So we scooted over there, filled our pockets with candy. We came back. We walked into the house. I'll never forget, Jimmy had just come home from the market. He said, where you boys been? Barry said, we just went over to Ricky's to get some candy. He said, you're in trouble because your mama, Barry, found out y'all were missing. So we ran out and got in the pup tent. We had no sooner got in our sleeping bags and closed the flap. I can still see this, and I was only 10 years old, but that flap went back, and Bibi was kneeling down. She had a big old stick in her hand. And she said, didn't I tell you boys not to leave this yard? Barry said, Mama, we just went over to Ricky's to get some candy. She said, I got a good mind to pull you out of those sleeping bags and wear y'all out with this stick. And I was pretending like I was asleep. I had one eye open, and I was, baby, please don't. She said, don't you leave this tent for the rest of the night. And we buttoned up. One more story I'll tell about BB. They had a swimming pool. I had taken swimming lessons at the Pompano City Municipal Pool when I was 8. Didn't learn a thing. We was over at BB's, Jimmy's house. They were all swimming. I couldn't swim. BB said, why aren't you swimming? I said, I don't know how to swim. She said, get in that water. I'm going to teach you how to swim. Before that day was over, BB taught me how to swim. So I just want to say that the history I have with the Collier family and Dr. George and the heritage I have growing up in Pompano, I love Pompano. And I'm sad Wayne's not here because Wayne always told me, Ricky, he said, I love Pompano. And I think it was hard for him to move away because he was a Pompano guy. That's about it.
You're not supposed to tell the tales out of school, Rick. I didn't mind using the stick. They got it often, and they deserved even more than they got. I'll tell this on Charlie Singleton and Barry were good friends, and they were fishing buddies, and they'd go to the pier and fish all day. I'd have to go out at dark and make them come home. But I didn't know this until several years ago, Cindy. Barry and Charlie was in the bathroom at your parents' house, and I don't know what kind of firecrackers or what they had, but I think they blew the sink off the wall. Yeah, they got into a lot of mischief, but they were good little fishermen. They were good fishermen, and my son still fishes today. My dad worked for Hammond Development in about 25, 26, and I have a letter in the file signed by Horace Robinson, who must have been part of that, and he was recommending my dad for being a good employee and trustworthy and honest. And it was on Pompano Lumber Supply Company stationery. But Dad did work for Hammond Development before he... Who was? Yeah, but Horace Robinson signed this letter. And, okay. My first job in Pompano was on Hammondville Road at Cohen's department store, and it was west of the Mobley store. And they called it a department store, but what it was jeans and boots, and it served the migrants, and they would come in back then they got paid on Saturdays. In later years, they changed it and paid them on Fridays. But they would come in on Saturday night and buy jeans or whatever they need. I don't think I worked there, but maybe just once. I know I got paid $2 for Saturday afternoon. My next job was at McClellan's Pharmacy. But I started that first job I had when I was 14 years old. And speaking of Dr. McClellan's office, a 26 Hurricane, my mother and dad were just married. And the McClellan family and mom and dad huddled in Dr. McClellan's office during the 1926 hurricane while it was blowing. And that's about it. Pompano was wonderful. Pompano was a wonderful place to grow up in.
Piggyback on that, I also grew up in her swimming pool, and we were a little scared of her, I'm not going to lie, but I was swimming in her pool when I was 10 years old with the Williams and the Green family. Yeah, yeah.
It was the first one in the neighborhood. We built it in 1960. It's still there and still good shape. But I'd count sometimes 21 in the pool. But I had my rules and regulations, and I was a stern taskmaster. But so many of the kids in the neighborhood did learn to swim in that pool.
Feel a little out of place here tonight, but I came because I grew up, born and raised in Pompano Beach, Florida. I was born at Holy Cross Hospital in 1958, and I grew up in a house that my parents built on Southeast 6th Street, which I lived in all of my growing years and came back to every Christmas. And my father, Ivan J. Smith, and he had a real estate company on the corner of Atlantic and A1A, which the building's still standing, but obviously is not operating anymore and hasn't been for a while. But I grew up here. My sisters did. I'm a bean picker, then known Tornadoes, class of 76. My sister Stephanie was class of 1970, and my sister Kelly Smith was 72. So I've been living here all my life. I grew up on 6th Street and came back and forth, and now I live on Southeast 2nd Street in a home that my grandparents actually built back in 65. So I guess I'm a lifer. I just can't get away. But I love it here, and I've seen a lot of changes and a lot of development, and like some of them, and being old school, I don't like some of them. I just want to stay how old Pompano was. But I have great memories here, and I do love it. I worked at Pompano Park, top of the park, for many years as a waitress with my then boyfriend, who is now my husband. And we opened a video store, Beach Video. I don't know if anybody remembers that. It was on Atlantic Boulevard, just east of the bridge. And that was open in '88 and closed probably, I don't even remember, but, video went like fossils, so had to close that. And I just am happy to be here and so interested to hear all the stories. And even though I didn't grow up in Old Pompano, most of my friends did, since I went to Pompano High, and I knew the Delks and the Hogans, Lee Hogan, and was a big farmer, and the Gennaros. I grew up with Mary Ann Gennaro and Denise Hogan, and the Fishers. I remember the Fishers. So it's so interesting to hear all these stories, because Pompano is my home, and when people say, "Oh, I'm a native Floridian," "Oh, well, where are you from?" "Well, I was born in," "Oh, no. If you were born in New York or wherever, you're not a native Floridian. You have to be born and raised here. And I am so proud to say I am born and raised in Pompano. It's still the sweet, quaint, beautiful little city that it was when I was growing up. And it continues to be, even though it's getting even more beautiful and a little bit more cosmopolitan and whatever. It's still a great place to be, and I'm happy to raise my children, who are now grown and gone. But I just wanted to say I enjoyed hearing everybody's story tonight. It was just so interesting to me, because I know a lot of these families and the farming, and my grandfather was a farmer as well in Fort Lauderdale. And anyway, just really appreciate hearing everything, and thank you for letting me say hello and give my little version of my lifetime here.
Thank personally those people that we asked to come and tell about your pioneer families. And I want to encourage you to remember the date for April 17th for the 50th anniversary of the Pompano Beach Historical Society. Also want to mention to you that if you don't buy a book of the history for $30 tonight, you can buy one at the 50th anniversary for half of that. So 50th anniversary for 50 cents, 50%.
I guess nobody's going to buy one tonight then.
So if you want to read before that, you can buy it for $30, which is a good price. It's a great book, and you'll see all the names of the pioneer families, but I'm so obligated to those people that came tonight that told your stories and about your pioneer families, and we're looking forward to Tom Johnston being our speaker for the 50th anniversary. So thank you very much. And I heard tidbits of everything. We have a tour every 2 months, the second Saturday, that Dan Hobby, the author of that book, gives us a tour of Pompano Beach. And there's more than 40 sites in Pompano Beach that we call to the attention, but there's 19 sites on the historic register for Pompano, and we're looking forward to the chapel about a block from here being moved in the next year.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Anybody else? Carol Ann? Sets up all the tables, does all the work that our board needs done. Her father also was one of the first firefighters and was right here in this firehouse, so she can tell the story.
Anyway, my dad became the fire chief, and we lived in the firehouse right next door when I was 3 years old for 3 years. And there's an old story, and I've been told, because I don't remember at 3 years old, that it was all volunteer fire people. And so my dad was in the shower one day, and either me or my brother, I keep thinking it's me, got up on the desk and pulled the fire alarm. And you had one beep for one territory, one for another territory, and one for another. Well, anyway, they started to come to see where they were supposed to go because it was very confusing. And then they just said, oh, well, we can't be mad at her. She's a cute little girl. You know, she didn't know any better. But anyway, the firehouse, my brother and I lived in the kitchen with bunk beds. You know, all firehouses have big kitchens. So that's where we lived, and my mom and dad lived in the front. And so they did a lot of things there. I understand that they would take the fire truck out and they would have square dances inside the firehouse, and Bill Jones would call for the square dancing. And they also had a women's quilting thing, and my dad had built a pull down for the ladies to have their quilt, you know, lay it out on the table, and they did the quilting there. And there was an old coconut tree that was like this, and the kids always came. My brother's friends would come, and they would see who could run the furthest up that tree. And that was just a fun thing to do. And Benny was a friend of my brothers and me, and their families, his mom and dad and everybody. We were all close friends. All these other people around here, we were all close. And I was born in the house in Old Pompano that is still there, 85 years ago. And we just have seen so much going on in this town. And I was a majorette in the high school. I don't know. Then I married my high school sweetheart, who was a charter fisherman, Joe Mott. I think his picture was up there or something once. Anyway, I've lived here my whole life, except for a few years. I decided to venture out and move to California with my friend, she had family in California. So I was actually gone for 13 years, and my high school sweetheart came looking for me, and 16 years later we got married, and we're married for 33 years before he passed. So just got a lot of roots here. My mom was on the Historical Society, one of the beginning people of the society. And what else do I need to know? What do you need to know? I know. When Pompano was 50 years old, we had a huge centennial celebration, and my brother was elected to be the barefoot mailman. He got to do the trek of the barefoot mailman, and he started at the lighthouse, and he went all the way to Miami, stopping at every city on the beach, and got keys to the city. The what? Oh yes, the big wig of the post office came at the end of the thing and washed his sore feet in a big tub of water at the fancy hotel in Miami. And so that was all exciting to be able to be part of that. So, and now here I am at historical. What? Who? Oh, geez, it was somebody came from wherever else. It wasn't local. It wasn't local. I forget who it was. Anyway, he also gave him the Barefoot Mailman book signed by the author, so which we still have that. And I don't know. It's just been an exciting, wonderful time to grow up here in Pompano, and now I'm at historical trying to help all of you people remember. And I'm not the one with the memory. And thank you all for coming. And before we leave, hopefully there will be somebody else that wants to talk, but we have all kind of cookies and dessert, so please don't leave here without that. And BB has something more to say.
Jim McNabb, your uncle, saved my mother's life in a coastal one day when she was young. Yeah.
Well, my husband being a fisherman and living out by the lighthouse, and those guys, his buddies, they would all go and get the turtle eggs at night, and they would go then to Cap's place and sell them for these dignitaries. That was illegal to have all of that. And anyway, they ate. So my husband was part of that took those eggs to have the turtle egg pancakes. So that's something to really be proud of, right? But it is what it is. It was part of the way we lived, and then they would get the flippers sometimes in, and then they would try to have big cookouts. But the hamburger, they had it grilled up to be hamburger. Well, it was so rich that it wouldn't stick together, so they had to finally get the butchers to add hamburger to it to make it, make it edible.
Before you guys leave, up here on the wall are some pictures of people we don't know who they are, so maybe some of you guys can identify them, and there's post-it notes here if you just put it on the picture of the person's name, if you know it. And Rob, our president.
Hi all. I think most of you know who I am. I just want to say, I always joke about that I'm from New England and we know history, but we don't. We know book history because it was long, long before any of us. You guys know history. You guys lived history. Your grandparents, your parents founded this town. It's like absolutely amazing, and I find it totally magical that you have this. I appreciate it. I hope you. It is really amazing that you lived it. That's all I have to say.
For my mom, being a graduate of Fort Lauderdale High School, one of her first dates back in the late 50s would be to drive up, and a date took her to Cap's place. And back in that time, you parked and you had to flash your brights on of your car to signal that you were there to be picked up, and a rowboat would come over and pick you up and take you there. Now they've got the boat and the motor and everything. And when I was a little girl growing up in the 60s, I remember Cap and going back, and he had like a throne back in the kitchen, and you would sit on his lap and he would give all the little girls a pin with a plastic flower on the end of it. And I thought, you could not get away with that these days. No little girls are going to go sit on this old man's lap back in this kitchen. But they were great memories, and it's still great food, and just the history. If nobody in this room's ever been there, you've got to go. You can't live down here and not go to Cap's place.
We've had our program there a couple of times.
Yeah.
Our monthly program for the historical.
It's the best, and the creaky floors, and I love that they've kept it just true to what it is, and I mean they put it on and everything, but it's a landmark, and I love it.
Thank you for letting me share. Sure. Anybody else?
We came here because my husband was supposed to speak, and he did. But just sitting here listening, I feel like I have a slightly different slant on Pompano. Pompano is very dear to me, and I think I'm just realizing that just sitting here because I was born in Japan, and then we moved several different places, Baltimore, Arizona, just several different places. So my grandparents moved here in '64, and my grandmother started the first kindergarten at the Methodist Church. So I got to be in Pompano from age 3 to 6, and I remember that. I remember kindergarten. I remember Easter egg hunts at the water tower, and I went to Cresthaven. But then my mom moved us away, and we didn't come back to Pompano until I was in 8th grade, and I've been in Pompano since 8th grade. And I married a Pompano guy, and we've lived within 3 blocks of where we first lived, which is right on 11th Avenue, and our 4 daughters were born at Holy Cross. And so the reason Pompano has such a special place to me is because for a girl that was moved around so much, Pompano is my home, and it's really, really special, and I'm grateful that I've lived here, and that, it's been that I got to live in Old Pompano, too.
Well, you married into Old Pompano.
I did, and I think my daughters are proud, too, that they were born and raised here, so.
All right. What you got to say?
I want to ask a question. Does anybody here remember the bridge on Atlantic Boulevard going over the Intercoastal when it was when it was done with like a U thing? I remember riding my bicycle out there, going on the bridge and walking around and opening the bridge with that thing. What is that called?
The crank, whatever they call it. Yeah.
When was that changed? That was part of my memory.
Yeah, me too.
So talking about that kind of a thing, I haven't told any story. My mom grew up here. She was born over here a block and a half away at my Uncle Oliver's house. My Uncle Oliver's house on 3rd Street, just a block from here. And the reason she was born there, because it was in town. Because the pavement stopped at 5th Avenue and they were on 10th Avenue. So anyways, I had always heard stories, and I started doing some research for John Knox Village. I did a program, and I had always heard that my mother and Frances Allison would take their horses to the beach and take them swimming. I never knew there was a picture. When I was going through it, I found a picture that's this big by this big, and on the back side of it, it says, Eldest and Frances Allison, Silver Thatch Beach, December 28th, 1943. And they're out there in the water. Totally would blow anybody away. But actually, Coast Guard had their horses stabled at Silver Thatch during World War II. Right. So that's totally got to be restored. I've got to do that picture.
The Pompano Airfield was used by the Coast Guard, and they practiced and had the Avenger planes there.
All right. All right. Anybody else? I think we've done really well, folks. Be sure to come back in April when we do our 50th anniversary. We're going to have a good time.